CardGamesTV1 Podcast. Rejuvenate. It's the max, right? Whatever. Rejuvenation loop, I call that. So, a lot of things I want to talk about, but the thing is always about preparing for the future. It's something I do, especially when just in general, that's what I do in life. I always look towards the future and prepare for it, right? But in card games, I do the same thing where I look to possible things that could be added to the game to make, the game different, right? From the way it used to be when the game first started, of course, and plan for it. So the game is getting to a point where a lot of the old ideas I had in 2019, 2020, stuff like that, are now coming to fruition, especially ever since they added Rejuvenate. I always wanted the ability to gain life in the game, and they created Rejuvenate, which was good, that at least it was added to the game. But the way they made Rejuvenate, they made it difficult to use. And there's some really ridiculous Rejuvenate cards where I'm like, what? Remove 7 markers. Plus, do this and that and blah, blah, blah. Well, there's one where it's not even remove markers. It's you minus 7 in order to trigger the effect to even Rejuvenate. Or some shit like that. Technically Rejuvenate. I don't think they actually use the word. But the actual Rejuvenate effects, most of their costs aren't too much per se. It's just there's some of the unisons don't have the effect to add a card under the unison. They expect you to add an extra copy of a unison under it. Now, granted, we do have a battle card now, the Trunks, Pan, and Goku GT 8-drop that has the ability to attach itself to a red unison to give it a marker, which is a start, right? So that's something we've been, I've definitely been waiting on, and they finally gave it to us. So of course I got a play set of the card more for that than to actually play the card. The card is good in general, but I just mainly use it just for that. That's the purpose of why I have it, because it's multi-purpose. It serves more than one role, but mainly it's for the fact that I can use it with a red unison to give it a marker, so I can ultimate it. The unison uses strongest effect right there and then. If the card has Rejuvenate, which if I'm right, there's maybe 2 or 3 unisons that has Rejuvenate. We know the King Piccolo unison has Rejuvenate. They hit that one preemptively. We know that that was one of the few unisons that would have been used to abuse Rejuvenate. We would have abused Rejuvenate. We're allowed to have one in our decks. It just one makes it hard to search. It makes it hard to play, because you have to get lucky. You mulligan and draw it, right? Just to start trying to use it. But if you do get it, there's benefits. And Rejuvenate is one of those benefits. Especially when you use the GT Goku Pan Trunks card to give it a marker, you're guaranteed to have a card under it. And then you just need a way to recycle the GT Trunks, right? Pan card, and attach it again, and once per turn attach it, right? And just and of course get the amount of markers necessary to remove to trigger Rejuvenate. I forgot how many markers you got to remove for that unison's Rejuvenate, but there are other unisons that have Rejuvenate, but not a lot of them in red, which would be awesome if they did have more red unisons with Rejuvenate, so that way the Trunks Pan GT card would be more useful, because it's one way of doing it. But in general, there are a couple other unisons that are in other colors that do have Rejuvenate, but their conditions a little bit difficult because there's no specific cards to put unisons under those. To put cards under those unisons. The only rule you have, the only thing you could put under the unison would be another copy of the same exact unison. So that is an option, but if you want to abuse it and loop it, it's going to be difficult. Not impossible, don't get me wrong, not impossible, just difficult. Now, we have a new unison. It's a PyCon unison, which I'm a fan of. I'm glad there's a new PyCon leader, new PyCon cards, and a new PyCon unison, which has Rejuvenate, and has a +2 marker ability, and it has a +0 ability, right, where you can put a card, right? No, it's draw a card, right? Draw a card, then put a card, yeah, up to one card from your hand under the unison. So this is a way that the unison, by default, have the ability to put a card under it. So its Rejuvenate effect is remove 5 markers. Obviously, it's remove 5 markers, take a card from under the unison, put it to the drop, and then take a card from the top of your deck and put it into your life. That's how Rejuvenate works, right? So then that means you'll have to either, at minimum, play the card for 5 energy, so that way it has 5 markers. Use this active main. I meant to say, you have to do it that way. Pay a minimum 5 to play it, right? So that way it has 5 markers. Then use this active main 0 ability to put a card under it, and then now you meet the conditions to Rejuvenate. But you're going to lose the unison, right? So obviously you should swing with the unison first, since it is a 15k, and then do the Rejuvenate, so that way you can gain a life. So that's a thing. We all know how useful that Rejuvenate is going to be competitively, especially when we make it easier to do so, to Rejuvenate, which is something I've been waiting for a while, especially for my Zamasu deck. So this PyCon, which is a blue unison, specified 2 blue energy. I'm going to experiment with it in my Hatchiyak deck. It's going to be so good in Hatchiyak. I see the potential already. And then Zamasu. It might be good, it might be alright. I mean, there is potential to loop it in Zamasu. Not so much in Hatchiyak, but ironically, you only need to Rejuvenate at least once with it for it to be very viable in Hatchiyak. Since Hatchiyak has a habit of having high life, have a high life because of its defensive capabilities. But using it in any other blue deck, it's going to be interesting. I mean, you can loop it. Oh, I'm going to try that in, what is it called? Janemba. Loop it in Janemba. Do this whole unison loop thing. Because we have a 2-drop blue negate. It's a Super Saiyan 3 Goku, something like that, 2-drop. Overflowing something. Anyway, I think it's Overflowing Spirit. Anyway, it has the ability to bounce a unison in your unison area back to your hand. In your unison area, right? Or in your drop area back to your hand, right? So you could deliberately, right, play it, do the Rejuve thing, right? And it ends up going to a drop, for example, and then use the 2-drop negate to negate an attack, right? Bounce it from the drop back to your hand. That way next turn you can play it, do its effect, Rejuvenate again. So this is the way you can, every turn gain life, because all you have to do is use something to bounce the negate back to your hand. So I got a nice little engine for that strategy. Now granted, this is like I said, it's a loop. It's a loop. It's a strategy, a nice one, but it's not like you'll be able to use it for a long period of time. That's the thing about certain loops, especially in Dragon Ball Super, because summoning sickness is not a thing in Dragon Ball Super, that these types of loops are not something you can use for like 2, 3, 4 turns in a row, right? You probably get lucky and use the loop once, or maybe not even at all, depending on your matchup. But here's the thing for me though, it's better to have and not need than to need and not have, right? I'd rather have this loop incorporated into my deck where I could, loop and gain 1 life every turn, which if time runs out in a match at a tournament, for example, I can win just because I have more life than my opponent, right? So that's the usefulness of Rejuvenate as a win con, right? As a win strategy because of time. So we'll see how Bandai deals with Rejuvenate competitively. You know, they might reconsider, like, nah, we don't want to, you know, let this be a thing. Because even I noticed when the King Piccolo unison in the King Piccolo deck, I've noticed, I mean, the only time I ever seen Rejuvenate and that, you know, work in one, in a competitive setting, and two, you know, just at all, just being used at all, was in the King Piccolo deck with the King Piccolo unison. So, you know, I would typically get my opponent down to 2 life by turn 2, and then, you know, close to turn 3, my opponent would try to, you know, their turn 3, they'll try to, you know, not try to, but they will actually succeed in Rejuvenate and gaining a life. So they'll go from 2 life to 3, right? Remember, they start off the game with 6 life. So I bring them down to 2, which means I dealt them 4 damage, but then they Rejuvenate and gain 1 back. So it's almost like I only dealt 3 damage. And that sucks when your, you know, hard work is being undone, right? But at the same time, this is the point, the power of Rejuvenate. And if you can abuse it, you know, while we have it, do so, right? Take advantage of it. Especially you can use it as a win con, because it's the whole you having more life than your opponent thing. And with some decks, that's actually easier said than done. That's why it's going to be so powerful in my Set 2 Zamasu deck, because once I awaken my leader, every time my opponent deals me damage, they're no longer dealing me damage to my life, they're dealing damage to my deck, right? My deck is, you know, I'm milling every time I take damage. So playing this in the deck, right, especially if I add the Rejuvenate, you know, the engine to recycle the unison and gain life, I can take myself from 2 life or 1 life back up to, like, you know, 3 or 4 life, while my opponent will probably still be like at 2 life or 1 life, and they're hanging by a thread, right? While every time I'm swinging, they're trying to stop me from dealing them 1 damage, right? But when time gets called, I'll have more life than them, and it'll be hard for them to take my life away, right? Because the way my Set 2 leader works. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised Bandai decides they want to ban Set 2 Zamasu just because of this Rejuvenate leader effect. But this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, the idea is, like, I've been waiting for something like this. Like, oh shit, yes. I was very close, because there was a black generic unison. It's like a Shadow Dragon unison or something, and it had the potential to be generically used, but Bandai realized that real quick. They're like, ooh, no, we can't have a generic Rejuvenate, especially we can't let Hatchyak have it. So they nerfed the card, so they made it where I can't use it with Hatchyak. It's like, god damn it, damn you, Bandai, right? I was so close, but now I got something that I can use in blue Hatchyak. Can't do mono black, right? Gotta do blue Hatchyak in order to use this unison, because this unison is a blue unison. So use this one in there and do the Rejuvenate thing in there. And then all I have to do is loop my defensive cards, right? Since it'll be hard for my opponent to deal me damage, you know. So I got 2 decks that can use this one unison and take full advantage of its power. Because the irony is just defending and gaining life, it in itself is a win con, especially when we have time rules, especially in a best of 1, playing blue hatch in best of 1, too good, because the deck's already too defensive, and then throw in Rejuvenate, good. So we'll see if Bandai decides if they want to rata that unison, or be an asshole and ban Set 2 Zamasu and Hatchyak, which I would not be happy with. That's literally 2 out of my 5 decks that I play. So, and ironically, those are the main decks that I like to use the most, because those are my colors, blue and black. So that'd be unfortunate if Bandai does that. So just something that I'm paying attention to. I finally got something that is going to put in some good work. It's going to put in some good work in those decks. It's going to be fun to try to incorporate them into the deck. Just like how I was doing the whole mill thing. The thing is that the mill strategy ain't bad, right? Putting mill in Zamasu and putting mill in Hatchiyak. The thing is that mathematically, I can't win in time. For example, right? I can't win in time with milling, right? Because you have so little time that the likelihood of your opponent, running out of cards is a lot less likely than, them being on low life and then time being called, right? Low as in lower than yours, right? So that's where the Rejuvenate would come in. So instead of me trying to use mill as a win con, even though that's still a possibility, instead of me trying to use mill as a win con, instead use life gain or rejuvenate, however you want to call it, as a win con, right? Just negate, right? Floodgate, negate my opponent, and increase my life. The funny thing is the Hatchiyak deck and the Zamasu, well, pretty much all my decks, technically, all my decks are pretty much the same concept. It's all about, making it hard for my opponent to deal me a lot of damage while I'm still dealing them damage. And then either A, I get them down to 0 and win, or B, I win in time because I have more life than them. So this Rejuvenate thing is going to help with that strategy, the whole having more life than my opponent. So I either knock my opponent out or I time them out. And that is the 2 main strategy that I'm leaning towards, right? Because there are ways to do it. Mill is, milling your opponent out is an option, but it's not as reliable or as consistent of a strategy than winning in time or winning by dealing your opponent 8 damage. Because as long as you can get the extra turns necessary to swing at your opponent and get through your opponent's defenses, as long as you can get through your opponent's defenses, you will deal damage, obviously. But once it gets harder to deal your opponent damage, right, get through their defenses, then winning in time and winning through decking out your opponent are the backup strategies. Because we all know the most basic aspect of the game is trying to deal your opponent 8 damage. The alternative ways of winning is the auto win effects of certain cards and leaders, the whole making sure you have more life than your opponents before time runs out, and the deck them out are the different ways you can win in the game. So I'm always looking for ways to make the game easier, right? Once you understand how the game works, then you build your decks accordingly, right? So that's why I was talking about planning for the future. Since I understand what I would like to do when I play, whenever new stuff comes out, I keep an eye out for certain effects, certain things that are useful. So that's why I was a little surprised when I saw the Rejuvenate on the Unison. The first thing I noticed on the Unison was the +2 ability. So it's a +2 ability. I'm like, ooh, it's a +2 Unison, and it's a 2-drop. That's nice. And then I looked at his +2 effect. I'm like, oh, okay, that's what his +2 does. I'm trying to remember what did his +2 do. it did something. Having to remember what it did exactly. You know, well, give me a second. Let me look it up real quick. Okay, that's what it was. It just lets you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, and then drop a blue card from your deck into the drop area. So it has this unison has potential in a specific deck. Well, in one of my Zamasu set 2 Zamasu builds, which is a skillless battle card deck. So there's potential to get my 30k skillless battle cards into the drop area just using this unison. So that's nice. So it's a good way of getting specific blue cards I want in the drop through the effect, and it could be potentially good in other strategies. So it has potential, is what I'm saying, because you know there's a Gogeta set to Zamasu deck that I have where this unison will be useful for helping me get the Goku and the Vegetas that I need in the drop in order to play the deck strategy. So there's that. Let's see. But mainly, I don't remember if it said I had to send a blue card or up to 1 blue card. More likely it's up to 1 blue card. So that means I don't have to send shit. I could just pay 2, look at the top 5, send nothing, and then just shuffle my deck afterwards. Right? I could just +2 just to shuffle. So not bad. And that's useful in itself, just the ability to shuffle, especially if you put cards at the bottom of your deck through card effects. Having this be able to shuffle your deck is always useful. So there's some uses. Like, this is a really good unison. I'm seeing a lot of potential in it and what I can do with it. So there's that. But the main thing is that it has Rejuvenate 5. Right, once per turn you remove 5 markers from it and put a card from under it to the drop, and take a card from the top of your deck and put it to your life. So the idea is obviously we're going to use it to put a card into our life so we can keep our life high, especially if we're going to use the life for blocker negates, dimension magic in the Zamasu deck, or Chill's army's reinforcement, the blocker negate. So there's potential to use it for that. But obviously what you really want to do is just gain the life and then keep it. So gain the life and then keep it, so that way when the time gets called, your opponent will ideally should have less life than you. Especially if you do this right before you end your turn, gain the life, then end your turn, and hopefully your opponent takes too long to attack, and then hopefully during the battle, time gets called or whatnot. You get the idea. Especially if you're paying attention to time. If you have like a timer, you use your phone to keep track of time. So as soon as they be like, all right, match starts, you push the button on your phone to start the timer, and then start, playing, and then look at the time, play, look at the time, play, right, keep track. There's a couple other ways you can do it. Obviously, if you have a watch, I normally do, especially a digital watch, makes it easier for you to keep an eye. Oh yeah, that's what I should do. I should use my watch, because it'll be less obvious, right, per se, that, because I could just use my watch and just set it, right, because, it has a stopwatch feature. Why not use it, right? So there you go. Use the stopwatch feature on your watch, digital watch, and, keep track. One, this will help you, keep track of how long your opponent takes to play their turn, as well as it'll help you keep track of how long the match is going, how long you take on your turn. Because fair is fair. If your opponent takes 5 minutes for their turn, it should take 5 minutes for your turn, right? Because it's bullshit for them to take that long. I remember playing against somebody on Edo Pro, which is something for Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a Yu-Gi-Oh! Simulator, card game simulator, and on there, the time is set for 3 minutes, so 180 seconds. And I've had people time out. All right, I had people lose because they wasted so much time. They literally took 3 minutes to try to play their combo, and they weren't even done. So it's like, damn, 3 minutes. You're literally taking 3 minutes just for your turn. It shouldn't even take that long. It should take 1 to 2 minutes at most. But it definitely shouldn't take that long to play out your turn. But that is the nature of some games, especially when you make it where there is no time. That becomes a problem when there is no time. But ain't it disrespectful, right, that we play with time competitively, right? We have timer where you have a certain amount of time to play a game, but the individual turns aren't timed to make sure that somebody doesn't take too long, and and take full advantage of that. This is why it's not surprising that some people are deliberately playing decks that I always jokingly say take 12 hours to finish out their turn. They're playing 12-hour combos, and that itself shouldn't be a strategy, right? That itself shouldn't be like, oh, okay, I play this deck that takes a long time to do stuff. And it's like, damn, your turn shouldn't take that long. You definitely shouldn't be allowed to take that long. But it's something you can do, so of course people are going to do it until it becomes a thing that you can't do. This itself just shows you the nature of like life and society. Even with, it's like everything requires rules. You would love it if people were just a little less asshole-ish, right? Where people had a little bit more integrity, and they'd be like, all right, I'm not going to play a strategy that literally would take a long time to play because that's unfair for my opponent, right? Now, I try to be that guy, right? The guy who, tries not to take too long playing their turn, right? But when 90% of your opponents are going to be wasting time and trying to take as much time in the game for themselves, unfortunately, since that's the nature of the game, right? The nature of the environment you're playing in, you're going to have to play the game, as they say, right? Now you're going to have to be better at playing with time than your opponent. That's why I made like a masterclass video about mastering time. Not something I felt that I had to make a video about originally, right? The idea of mastering time, because my main thing is like, you don't want to take too long. You want your turns to be faster, right? That way there would be more time in the game. The problem is when you have people wasting it. You deliberately try not to waste time, but then your opponent wastes his time. And that's unfortunate because you have no control of that, right? You don't have control over the fact your opponent is wasting time. And they're wasting it for their benefit. So that's unfortunate for you. So since that's literally part of the game now, right? Part of most games, that are time-based. When you're playing casually, time is irrelevant. If the game takes 2 hours to finish, then it takes 2 hours to finish. But when you're playing competitively, you're playing best of one, for example, you got up to 35 minutes to play a game. Time wasting, it's not a good thing when the time is being wasted against you, right? And since that's a factor, you're going to have to accept it, right, as is. Can't undo it. You could try, right? You could try to make it where it doesn't matter that your opponent's wasting time, because you probably only need 2 to 3 turns to win anyway, so they can waste as much time as they want, because you're going to win anyway, right? But that's not always the case. Not everyone can win in 3 turns, right? Some people literally have decks that are designed to win on turn 4 or 5, so sometimes even turn 6, right? So with that and with those types of decks, the whole time wasting thing is a disadvantage for them, right? It's a weakness for them, because your opponent can exploit the fact that they can take their time. Now, granted, you can call a judge and be like, oh, they're slow playing this and third, right? But that ironically also wastes time. That's one of the irony with calling the judge for somebody slow playing, is that you have to wait for the judge to come over. Then you have to wait for the judge to, you know, be judging, but all right, what's going on, and blah, blah, blah. So it's like all this time being wasted involving the judge. So the irony with slow playing is that they want you to call the judge because that will slow the game down even more. Even if the player is like, okay, yeah, sorry, I'll try to be faster. It doesn't matter. They already wasted time already. Then more time was wasted when the judge came over. And yeah, of course they're playing faster now, but it doesn't matter. They already did what they wanted to do. They already wasted time. And that's the thing you can't get back. That's the thing. Judges could barely give you back time. You know, you could get lucky, and if there's a draw or something like that, they'll be like, all right, y'all, 5 more minutes when time gets called. All right, y'all get 5 more minutes. Like, you could, but again, your opponent could literally waste those 5 minutes. Like I said, some people waste 3 minutes already when they play. They already try to waste 3 minutes. So imagine getting an extra 5 minutes. Your opponent's going to try to waste 4 minutes, which gives you 1 minute, and that 1 minute might not be enough. You might need 2 minutes in order to play your turn. You know, especially if they just to win, you might need 2 minutes to play out your strategy to win, and your opponent just reduced it down to 1 minute, so you're not going to be able to win because you don't have the time for it. So that's why mastering time is important. You know, trying to make sure that all your strategies, your play style can adapt and play within a time constraint, and make the most with less time. So you have to try to make the most with the least, right? That's why I do stuff like double strike and stuff like that, like Champa and Issa Pink Kai. And I try to put them in a lot of decks, or at least try to have a lot of double strikes in my decks, or dual attackers, because I'm trying to make sure I can do the most amount of damage in a short period of time, because there's no guarantee I have the time to do it the slow way, right? So speed is important. When it comes to time, speed is key. So being able to do a lot of damage quickly, that's why I try to do like 4 to 6 damage on turn 1 with my X-hit combo decks, or just with most of my decks. That's why I use the skillless, you know, unison strategy, where, you know, turn 1 I can output 4 to 5 damage, because there's no guarantee I get to turn 3 or 4. There's a possibility I might not make it that far, right? Because I could potentially lose before I get through those turns, or for some reason my opponent takes way too long on their turn, that by the time I get called before I even get to those turns. But ironically enough, with, you know, when I play competitively, with the 2 decks that I played, the Setu Zamasu and the Hatchiak deck, which was not the blue version, I still managed to get to like turn 8 with Hatch. With Zamasu, you know, 5 and 6 were the most common turns I was able to get to, but it was kind of difficult to try to get to 7. Not impossible per se, but it was more difficult. More so because of the way I was playing made it more difficult. So obviously I improved on my strategy, my defensive strategy I should say, not my offensive strategy. My offensive strategy still the same. First 4 damage the easiest, next 2 requires a little effort, last 2 is hardest. That still hasn't changed. What I changed was my defensive strategy, which is where defending turn 1 and turn 2 is very important, because that helps guarantee that I'll get to turn 5 or 6. So if my strategy is based off of me getting to turn 5 or turn 6, then it's important for me to defend turn 1, turn 2. So I play my turn 1, turn 2s differently now than I used to. So sometimes I have to play those turns the old-fashioned way, you know, the way I normally would play those turns. But on average, nowadays, I do play my first 2 turns differently. But that's the importance of, you know, improving yourself as a player. It's not about changing cards in your deck per se, or playing a different leader or whatnot. Sometimes it's literally just changing the way you do things has a huge impact on the outcome, right? So that's why I always try to focus on is like the player getting better, the player improving, because you don't need to play a different deck. You don't need to play the quote-unquote best deck in the format. You just have to improve yourself as a player and be the best player you can be, right? The best version of yourself, and that's more than enough. Granted, can you do both? Play the best deck in the format and improve as a player, right? Yeah, of course, you can do both. Go ahead, do it. Do what works, right? Whatever works, works. If you can be a bad player with a great deck and still top events, hey, that's good enough. I'm not complaining, right? Hey, if it works, it works. That's what I always say. If it works, it works. But this is why the way I do things should be taken into consideration, because it does work for me. You know what I mean? And you know what the old saying is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But there's the other saying, if it's broken, don't fix it, right? If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Because that's the thing, you want broken. Broken as in, obviously OP, busted, as they say, right? You want to make sure you have OP strategies, right? You want to have advantage when you're playing, so that's why mastering time, that's why improving your defensive capabilities, because the idea is to make sure your opponent doesn't deal you a lot of damage, but you always want to make sure you always dealing your opponent a lot of damage. So I'm pretty consistent when it comes to how much damage I deal my opponent. I don't have to worry about that as much. I just got to make sure that my defense is on fleek, right? My defense is high. And I've always been a defensive player anyway, so it only makes sense that I improve my defensive plays, my defensive strategies. So I've been playing with doing test hands with my Boma deck, so I have been improving on the ability to last past turn 6 with the deck, so that's always good. It's typically like 5 or 6 is usually the max turns with the deck, just based off of how I play. But since I am changing the way I play, to obviously improve the way I play, so I'm improving the way I play, then of course that's going to get me bigger, better results. So now, it's all about getting to them late games, because turns take time, right? So you always want to make sure that you have an extra turn, so that we have extra, that way you can take extra time, as they say, right? You want to take as much time as possible. You want to create scenarios where your opponent has to take time on their turn. Then you take another turn and you take time. Then give your opponent a turn. Then they take time, right? So that's the thing. You want to make sure more turns happen. That way more time gets used up. So that way when time runs out, ideally, you want to have more life than your opponent so you can win that way, right? Or they deck out, because, they can deck out in time if you take enough turns, because the more turns your opponent gets, the more they draw, right? They draw for their turn, they draw for their leader, they might draw for a unison, they might draw for a battle card, right? So a lot of draw. So you definitely want to take advantage of that. So in a way, just by being able to make sure there's always an extra turn, you'll always have an extra turn, that's extra drawing your opponent's going to do, which kind of translates to milling, right? If your opponent is drawing for their leader, unison their turn, and let's say a battle card, that's 4 cards a turn. In 5 turns, that's 20 cards out their deck. Let's say they only have 20 cards left. Well, you just got to last 5 to 6 turns, right? So, what else? I think that's about it. Not much to say. Obviously, I just saw one card and saw the potential of what I can do with it, and it was just the whole idea of like, this is something I've been waiting for a long time. There's some cards that I've been waiting for a long time, like effects or card types that have certain effects, like unisons with certain effects, right? Like a really good a really good Rejuvenate unison. And the fact that I made it blue, I'm like, that would have been something, that would have been that would have been a wish for me, right? I would have wished and wanted, like, oh, I want a blue Rejuvenate Unison because I got some ways to abuse it. But I'm like, but that's busted, right? That's broken. That's OP. Bandai shouldn't do that. But they did, right? As an example. So it's like stuff that, so there's stuff that I'm like, yeah, it'll be really, really strong, really busted, really broken, right? If they add this effect into the game, because I already have plans to abuse it. That's what I'm trying to say. So I already have plans to abuse it. So if it was added to the game, I'm already prepared to abuse it, to use it. So, I already have the leaders. I already have the cards for it. I just got me, like a couple weeks ago, 3-drop King Vegeta, blue King Vegeta, which has the ability to grab, I think, a 2 cost or higher, I think it was. Something like that. I have to double check. It's either 2 costs or higher or 2 costs or less, whatever. Or just a 2-drop specifically, Unison from the drop and add it to your hand, right? And this is a 2-drop blue Unison with Rejuvenate. Hello? You see where I'm going with this? I could literally use the battle card to grab the Unison, use the Unison to Rejuvenate, and just keep recycling it, right? Keep, looping it. Because all I have to do is bounce the blue Unison back to my hand, and blue has some bounce effects. There are some effects in blue to bounce your own stuff, right? Kibito Kai Attendant being one of those cards. So I can use the Kibito Kai to recycle, right, to bounce and reuse the Vegeta. And use the Vegeta to grab the Unison. Now, granted, there is a slightly better option, right? But I can play both, but there's a slightly better option, which is the 2-drop Super Saiyan 3 Overflowing Spirit Goku. Because I can negate an attack and grab the Unison from the drop or the Unison area and add it to my hand. So that one's a little bit more cost effective, because if I write the King Vegeta is a 3-drop. So that's one extra energy I have to spend on that strategy. With the 2-drop, one would be better. Plus the 2-drop negates an attack. That's useful. So having something that can negate an attack plus help you rejuvenate, recycle the card the Unison you're gonna use to rejuvenate, it's a lot of spam. Obviously, it already synergized very well with another Unison that I like to use, because that Unison has a or wipe capability, plus it has a floodgate effect, so that's a thing. So yeah, I'm gonna get a chance and definitely work on that Zamasu deck to abuse that strategy, and then of course put that into the black deck, black Hatchiyak and blue Hatchiyak, and do some fun stuff with that. So we shall see how good it is. So far, just in my mind, it already is good. It already does what I needed to do. So it's definitely going to be good. Because both decks I can stall to like turn 6 and above. I can get to like turn 6, turn 7. In Hatchiyak, I definitely can get to turn 8. So it wouldn't be that hard to use the card to rejuvenate and still have energy for negates. Plus, I use in both decks, I'm gonna be using Shenron Figure Majesty to untap 2 energy, right? That way I could always have the 2 energy, right, for the negate, right? So negate an attack and bounce the Unison from the drop or from the Unison area back to my hand, so I could play next turn and just rejuvenate and keep that little loop going, right? So there are some effects. So as you can see, I'm already prepared for doing some broken stuff, and I got a new toy to play with, so I'm excited. So I definitely can't wait to see it in action. Especially it'd be exciting to go to a tournament and utilize it, get the most out of it. Especially get some W's out of it, which is always the goal, right? The goal is always to try to get as many W's as you can. And that'll be the end of the podcast.